Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to Hertford Theatre and to the Gala opening of Hertford Children's Book Festival 2014. Why not? Why not? My name's Rhys Thomas. I'm the director of Hertford Theatre, and I am chuffed to bits that we've been able to work again with the organisers of Hertford Children's Book Festival to bring you an awesome range of arts, events and activities and shows, all based around children's books. It's absolutely brilliant for us, and it's terrific to see so many people here tonight to join in the fun. However, I've got the unfortunate task of reminding everybody that you mustn't take any photographs or video recordings during the show. Now, I know it's really, really tempting because some of the people, you know, they're really famous and you're big fans, and that's fantastic. But please, don't take any pictures and don't make any video recordings. Before we start properly, I just wanted to give you a little overview of the evening. The first part, as I'm sure you're aware, we're going to be inviting friends and supporters of Hertford Children's Book Festival onto the stage to share with us all their experiences and their thoughts, their feelings about children's books and everything that children's books represent to them, which is terrific. We'll then take a half an hour break. And in that half an hour, wait for it, we're going to offer you, oh yes, a free glass of Prosecco. And if you are under the age of 18, a nice glass of orange juice. Yeah, that's right. And to go with that, we've got a few nibbles as well, because obviously you can't have a drink without a few nibbles. But most importantly about that interval, you may have noticed when you came in, we have the most fantastic pop-up bookshop in the foyer that has been brought to life by my fabulous front-of-house team and the wonderful Rebecca from Leaf Bookshop. There's an incredible range of books for sale, many by the authors that you're going to meet this evening. And of course, there's a wonderful opportunity to buy a book and get it signed to make it even more special than it already is. And there will also be those people who aren't authors may well also be floating around in the foyer at the interval. And I'm sure that if you approach them very, very nicely, they'll sign your books, which is fabulous. So, without more ado from me, I need to bring to the stage two very, very important people. And without these two people, this book festival would not happen. They have worked tirelessly, morning, noon, and night for the whole of the last 12 months with huge commitment, passion, sometimes a dollop of emotion. Yes, there has been tears. But they also make some amazing lemon drizzle cake. And I would like you to give a massive, massive Hertford Theatre welcome to the two organisers of Hertford Children's Book Festival, Freya North and Maureen Pegg.
Hey, they came. Warmest welcome to the Hertford Children's Book Festival 2014, and what an evening we have in store for you. Before we welcome our first very special guest, we just wanted you to know a little bit more about us. She and me, we're bookworms, And we want to bring the magic of books to you. So whether you read in the bath, or whether you read in bed, whether you read paperback books, or whether you read... He can stay. I don't have any accessories on at the moment, so the butterfly can stay. Come on, that's got to be good luck. They don't bite, do they?
Yes, they do.
Do they bite?
No.
Okay. So whether you read in the bath or in bed, and whether you read on a Kindle or paperback books, it doesn't matter, as long as you're reading. We know that tonight's authors and special guests are really going to entertain you and inspire you.
So, we want to give a special thanks to all our generous sponsors. East Herts Council, Hertford Town Council, Hertfordshire County Council, Hertford Museum, Courtyard Arts, David's Bookshop Letchworth, Leaf Cafe, Haileybury College, St Joseph's in the Park, Essendon Country Club, Waitrose, the Hertfordshire Mercury, and Hertford Theatre. I think we've forgotten someone. Have we forgotten someone?
Have we forgotten someone? Our family and friends. Massive thanks to you.
Thank you.
And now, without further ado, it's on with the show.
Okay, folks, we're going to press on now. The first person to come to the stage this evening is a poet, illustrator, comedian. He was once described by the Scotsman newspaper as more Elvis Costello than Alan Bennett, and by the Sunday Times as outrageously talented, but by our more local Herts advertiser as a good deed in a naughty world. I'd love you to give a big welcome to the unique talent that is John Hagley.
Thank you very much, thank you. Okay, I'm going to do a little warm-up song for you. Some of you may be wondering what this instrument's called. It's called Steve. That's the first joke, and the best, unfortunately. Right, now, we move on. We've only got 5 minutes to do this, so I'm going to show you the movements. As I say, it's the warm-up. So these are the movements. A guillemot is a bird, and it goes diving for fish. This is the bridled guillemot. Looks as though it's wearing a pair of white spectacles, or anyway. So when I say I'm a guillemot, it's 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm a guillemot, or 1, 2, 3. So 2 prep moves, and then you bring centre the energy on the third move. Okay, so let's try that. On your own, I'm a guillemot. Yes, an internal count. I don't actually need to hear the count. Okay. So when I use my bill a lot, eat my fill a lot, ledges, vertical edges, ledges, vertical edges. Okay, water or wet, fish and water. Okay, quite difficult, but some of you are managing it. Yeah, jellyfish. Now, jellyfish is difficult, so I want you to work in pairs. Okay, here we go then. Song about a guillemot. All right, Hertford, let's rock. I am a guillemot. A few short-term memory problems out there. Okay, from the top, here we go. I am a guillemot, I use my bill a lot, I get the fish out of the wet, I eat my fill a lot. I live on ledges, vertical edges, eating ones I do not know what veg is. Don't give me sherbet, give me a turbot. My appetite for fish I cannot curb it. I am a guillemot, I know the drill a lot. I drill into the drink and get the drink and not the ink upon my quill a lot. So you don't thrill a lot? Well, listen, humans, very soon you will a lot. Did you know that I can go so deep I've been seen from the porthole of a submerged submarine 130 metres under? I don't think so. Miss it and blink so. I come in hard and I'm able to sink so. I am a guillemot. I do my perching and my researching. Then underneath I go, I'm no sea urchin. I am a diver, ocean arriver. Underneath I go, I am no skiver. I am a guillemot. I do my specky, recce from my rocky windowsill a lot. I don't eat trill a lot. I don't do nesting when I am resting. I can sleep while I am standing on one leg, and so it doesn't roll off when I stretch my wings or stroll off. I've got an egg that is conical and eccentrically weighted, so it don't fall off the edge of the cliff face into the water with all the jellyfish and all the other fish. I am a guillemot. I find the fishes tend to lose 1-0 a lot. But I take only what I need. I'm not a greedy bird. I'm sustainable, self-restrainable. I am a guillemot. And that's your lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the wonderful John Hagley. And next up, we have a dear friend and an amazing actress, Amanda Abington.
Hello. I had to follow John Hagley. Thank you. That's great. This is one of my favourite books, and it's called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I'm sure you all know it. And I'm going to read you one of my favourite chapters, which is called Veruca in the Nut Room. Mr. Wonka rushed on down the corridor. The nut room, it said on the next door they came to. All right, said Mr. Wonka. Stop here for a moment and catch your breath and take a peek through the glass panel of this door. But don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go into the nut room. If you go in, you'll disturb the squirrels. Everyone crowded round the door. Grandpa, look, look, cried Charlie. Squirrels, said Veruca Schultz. Crikey, said Mike TV. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools around a large table. On the table there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working away like mad, shelling the walnuts at tremendous speed. These squirrels are specially trained for getting the nuts out of walnuts, Mr. Wonka explained. Why use squirrels? Mike TV asked. Why not use Oompa Loompas? Because, said Mr. Wonka, Oompa Loompas can't get walnuts out of walnut shells in one piece. They always break them in two. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of walnut shells every time. It is extremely difficult. But in my factory, I insist upon only whole walnuts. Therefore, I have to have squirrels to do the job. Aren't they wonderful? The way they get those nuts out. And see how they first tap each walnut with their knuckles to make sure it's not a bad one. If it's bad, it makes a hollow sound, and they don't bother to open it. They just throw it down the rubbish chute. There, look, watch that squirrel nearest to us. I think he's got a bad one now. They watched the little squirrel as he tapped the walnut shell with his knuckles. He cocked his head to one side, listening intently. Then suddenly he threw the nut over his shoulder into a large hole in the floor. Mummy, shouted Veruca Salt suddenly, I've decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels. Don't be silly, sweetheart, said Mrs. Salt. These all belong to Mr. Wonka. I don't care about that, said Veruca. I want one. All I've got at home are 2 dogs, 4 cats, 6 bunny rabbits, 2 parakeets, 3 canaries, a green parrot, a turtle, a bowl of goldfish, a cage of white mice, and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel. All right, my pet, Mrs. Salt said soothingly. Mummy will get you a squirrel just as soon as she possibly can. But I don't want any old squirrel, Veruca shouted. I want a trained squirrel. At this point, Mr. Salt, Veruca's father, stepped forward. Very well, Wonka, he said importantly, taking out a wallet full of money. How much do you want for one of these squirrels? Name your price. Oh, they're not for sale, Mr. Wonka answered. She can't have one. Who says I can't? Shouted Veruca. I'm going in to get myself one this very minute. Don't, said Mr. Wonka quickly, but it was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with small black beady eyes. Veruca stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws. "All right," Veruca said, "I'll have you." She reached out her hands to grab the squirrel, but as she did so, in that first split second, when her hand started to go forward, there was a sudden flash of movement in the room, like a flash of brown lightning, and every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap towards her and landed on her body. 25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned it down. 25 caught hold of her left arm and pinned that down. 25 caught hold of her right leg and anchored it to the ground. 24 caught hold of her left leg. And the one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of them all, climbed up onto her shoulder and started tapping the wretched girl's head with its knuckles. "Save her!" screamed Mrs. Salt. "Veruca, come back! What are they doing to her?" "They're testing her to see if she's a bad nut," said Mr. Wonka. "You watch." Veruca struggled furiously, but the squirrels held her tight and she couldn't move. The squirrel on her shoulder went tapping the side of her head with his knuckles. Then all at once, the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. "My goodness, she is a bad nut after all," said Mr. Wonka. "Her head must have sounded quite hollow." Veruca kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The tiny, strong paws held her tightly and she couldn't escape. "Where are they taking her?" shrieked Mrs. Salt. "She's going where all the other bad nuts go," said Mr. Willy Wonka. "Down the rubbish chute." "By golly, she is going down the chute," said Mrs. Salt, staring through the glass door at his daughter. "Then save her," cried Mrs. Salt. "Too late," said Mr. Wonka, "she's gone." And indeed, she had. "But where?" shrieked Mrs. Salt, flapping her arms. "What happens to the bad nuts? Where does the chute go?" "That particular chute," Mr. Wonka told her, "runs directly into the great big main rubbish pipe, which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory, all the floor sweepings and potato peelings and rotten cabbages and fish heads and stuff like that." "Who eats fish and cabbage and potatoes in this factory, I'd like to know," said Mike TV. "Well, I do, of course," said Mr. Wonka. "You don't think I live on cacao beans, do you?" But, shrieked Mrs. Salt, "where does the great big pipe go in the end?" "Why, to the furnace, of course," Mr. Wonka said calmly. "To the incinerator." Mrs. Salt opened her huge red mouth and started to scream. "Don't worry," said Mr. Wonka. "There's always a chance that they've decided not to light it today." "A chance?" yelled Mrs. Salt. My darling Veruca, she'll be sizzled like a sausage." "Quite right, my dear," said Mr. Salt. "Now see here, Wonka," he added, "I think you've gone just a shade too far this time. I do indeed. I mean, my daughter may be a bit of a frump, I don't mind admitting it, but that doesn't mean you can roast her to a crisp. I'll have you know, I'm extremely cross about this, I really am." "Oh, don't be cross, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka. "I expect she'll turn up again sooner or later. She may not have even gone down at all. She may be stuck in the chute just below the entrance hole, and if that's the case, all you have to do is go and pull her up again." Hearing this, both Mr. and Mrs. Salt dashed into the nut room and ran over to the hole in the floor and peered in. "Veruca," shouted Mrs. Salt, "are you down there?" There was no answer. Mrs. Salt bent further forward to get a closer look. She was now kneeling right on the edge of the hole with her head down and her enormous behind sticking up in the air like a giant mushroom. It was a dangerous position to be in. She needed only one tiny little push, one gentle nudge in the right place, and that is exactly what the squirrels gave her. Over she toppled into the hole, head first, screeching like a parrot. "Goodness gracious me," said Mr. Salt, as he watched his fat wife go tumbling down the hole. "What a lot of rubbish there's going to be today." He saw her disappearing into the darkness. "What's it like down there, Angina?" he called out. He leaned further forward. The squirrels rushed up behind him. "Help!" he shouted, but he was already toppling forward and down the chute he went, just as his wife had done before him and his daughter. "Oh dear," said Charlie, who was watching with the others through the door. "What on earth's going to happen to them now?" "Well, I expect someone will catch them at the bottom of the chute," said Mr. Wonka. "But what about the great fiery incinerator?" asked Charlie. "They only light it every other day," said Mr. Wonka. Perhaps this is one of the days when they let it go out. You never know. They might be lucky. Shh, said Grandpa Joe. Listen! Oh, listen, here comes another song. From far away down the corridor came the beating of drums. Then the singing began again.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Amanda Abington. Now, will you welcome to the stage a fantastic author and also a time traveller, Mr. Alex Garrow.
Thank you. Wow, it is pretty full tonight. Time Riders, the time travel series. Some of you may have read it. It's basically, to give you a potted idea, it's about a group of teens whose job it is to prevent time travel from happening in the near future. And they are teenagers who are recruited from the very last moments of their lives, literally as they are about to die, so that their abstraction from the world doesn't change anything. And what I'd like to do is read to you a bit from the beginning of the first book. One of the team members is a young Irish lad who just happened to be working aboard the Titanic the night it went down. So this is his, if you like, his recruitment scene. Time Riders, Book 1 of 9. Chapter 1, 1912, middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Is there anyone here left on deck E? Cried Liam O'Connor. His voice echoed down the narrow passageway, bouncing off the metal walls. Is there anyone down here? It was silent, save for the muffled cries and the clatter of hasty footsteps coming from the deck above. And the deep, mournful creak of the ship's hull, stressing, stretching, as the bow end of the ship slowly began to dip below the ocean's surface. Liam braced himself against the steepening angle of the floor, holding on to the doorframe of the cabin beside him. The chief steward's instructions are being quite specific, quite clear, to make sure all of the cabins along this passageway were empty before coming up to join him. But he wasn't so sure he wanted to now. Not now. The sound of screaming, wailing, crying, coming from the women and children on the deck above sounded shrill, sounded terrifying. At least down here, amid the second-class cabins, there was an eerie sense of peace. Not quite silent, though, not quite. Faintly, he could hear it. A deep rumble. And he knew exactly what that sound was. It was the sound of the freezing cold ocean cascading into the stricken ship, roaring through open bulkheads on the deck below, gradually pulling the Titanic down. Last call, he cried again. You know, a few moments ago, he'd come across a young mother and her daughter, cowering in one of the cabins. Both of them were wearing their life jackets, but the mother was quite paralyzed with fear. She was doing nothing to save herself, nothing to save her daughter. She was just sitting there on her bunk with her daughter wrapped in her arms, telling her a story. Crazy. He'd led them out of the cabin, along the passageway, up the stairs to deck D. And, you know, on the stairwell, as they parted company, that little girl quickly kissed Liam on the cheek, wished him luck, as if she somehow knew most of them weren't going to survive tonight. Liam could feel the angle of the floor increasing beneath his unsteady feet. From the top of the passageway, he heard the crash of crockery tumbling from shelves in the steward's room, and he knew the ship was going down now very, very soon. He decided to look into one last cabin. He stuck his head in. Oh, the cabin was empty. But his eyes were drawn to the small, round portal window, drawn by movement. He turned to look, saw nothing but darkness at first, but then there it was again. A fleeting, quicksilver flutter of bubbles racing past. And he realized right then the deck was below the waterline. Stuff this, I'm done here. He steps back out into the passageway and he saw at the end a ripple of water, only inches deep, gently lapping up along the slanting floor towards him. All No, no, no! No! You stayed too long, Liam, you fool! You stayed too long. He realized now that girl and her mother had been his faithful warning to get out. He should have left 5 minutes ago. He should have left with them. He should have been climbing that stairwell. Because now he was trapped. The icy cold water met his shoes, trickled into these shoes, rolled on past, quickly getting deeper and deeper. He started to wade down the passageway because down there at the far end, where the lights were flickering, that was the way out. That was the stairwell down there. He waded down the passageway until the water was now up around his armpits. And now he could see more clearly down there where the lights were flickering. Now he could see. The water was now lapping the ceiling. And that meant the entire stairwell was flooded. That was it. He was going to die. He was going to drown. The only way out would be to hold his breath, hope it would last him long enough to find his way up that stairwell. He was going to drown. He was going to die now. And that's when he heard it. The sound of movement from behind. He turned around. He saw an old man standing there, ankle deep in the water, further up the passageway. Liam O'Connor! Sir, there's no way out this way, sir! We're stuck! Liam O'Connor, I know who you are, lad. I know who you are. Sir, we're going to get out now. Listen to me, boy, listen. He looked at his watch. Liam, you have just under 2 minutes left to live. He looked around at the metal bulkheads of Deck E. This ship's spine will snap in about 90 seconds' time, and she will sink like a stone 1.5 miles down to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, please, no. Liam was crying now. And as we sink, Liam, the water pressure will quickly mount. The hull will buckle under that pressure. The water pressure will burst your eardrums, Liam. In 30 seconds, 90 seconds' time, Liam, this entire passageway will instantly fill with freezing cold water. You'll be crushed before you can drown. That's at least a quick death for you, a merciful death for you, Liam. Our Jesus, sir, can you not help us? You're going to die, Liam. You are going to die. But don't you see? That's what makes you perfect. Perfect? What are you talking about? The man took several steps forward, wading into the water. Tell me, lad, do you want to live? Yeah, I want to live. Is there another way out that way, sir? The lights in the passageway flickered out in unison. Then a moment later came back on. 60 seconds, Liam. 60 seconds until she buckles. Not long now. Is there another way out that way, sir? If you come with me, there is another way. You'll live an invisible life. You'll exist as a phantom never quite in this world of ours. Well, I want that. I want to live. I'm not offering you your life, Liam. Oh, no. I'm offering you a way out. And that's all. Liam grabbed hold of a flickering wall light, put himself back up the slanting passageway until his feet touched the floor once more. And just then they heard a loud, shuddering groan rippling all around them, quite deafening. She's dying, Liam. She's dying. Can you hear that? The Titanic's back is just about to break. It was then that Liam got his first clear look at the old man's face. And he saw deep, sad eyes surrounded by wrinkles of age. And the strangest thought occurred to Liam just then. Sir, is it that you're an angel, sir? Is that it? Am I already dead? No, Liam, I'm just a man, but we've got to go now. We need to leave right now. All of a sudden, they felt a shudder. The floor around them convulsed beneath their feet. The air was filled with the shriek of tearing sheet metal, the pop of unbuckling seams as deck after deck above them began to give way one after the other. Here it is, Liam! It's time to go! Liam pulled himself forward, up out of the water, reaching out for the old man's hand. If there'd been time, if his mind hadn't been a complete free fall of panic, he might just have wondered who that man was, or how he was going to save the pair of them. But right then, the only thought in his head was this: I don't want to die. I don't want to drown. The light suddenly winked out, leaving them in complete darkness, and Liam flailed with his arm blindly. Where's your hand, please, sir? Where's your hand? I don't want to drown. His fingers brushed the old man's. The old man grasped his hand and held on. Say goodbye to your life, Liam, he roared above the thunderous din of the ship splitting in two. And the last sensation that Liam was aware of Was the vibrating floor beneath the ship just giving way and falling through darkness? Thank you very much. That was the first 2 chapters. Thank you.
Alex Garrow. Okay, next up we have a fabulous comic actress. Give her a warm, warm welcome to Sue Vincent.
Hello. I would like to read from my very own copy, Susan, age 6.5, of the Oxford Book of Children's Verse. The first one is Us Two by A. Milne. Wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh in me. Whatever I do, he wants to do. Where are you going today, says Pooh. Well, that's very odd, because I was too. Let's go together, says Pooh, says he. Let's go together, says Pooh. What's twice 11, I said to Pooh. Twice what, said Pooh to me. I think it ought to be 22. Just what I think myself, said Pooh. It wasn't an easy sum to do. But that's what it is, said Pooh, said he. That's what it is, said Pooh. Let's look for dragons, I said to Pooh. Yes, let's, said Pooh to me. We crossed the river and found a few. Yes, those are dragons, all right, said Pooh. As soon as I saw their beaks, I knew. That's what they are, said Pooh, said he. That's what they are, said Pooh. Let's frighten the dragons, I said to Pooh. That's right, said Pooh to me. I'm not afraid, I said to Pooh, and I held his paw and I shouted, shoo, silly old dragons. And off they flew. I wasn't afraid, said Pooh, said he. I'm never afraid with you. So wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh and me. What would I do, I said to Pooh, if it wasn't for you? And Pooh said, true. It isn't much fun for one, but two can stick together, says Pooh, said he. That's how it is, says Pooh. The next poem is Macavity the Mystery Cat by T.S. Eliot. Macavity's a mystery cat. He's called the Hidden Paw. For he's the master criminal who can defy the law. He's the bafflement of Scotland Yard, the flying squad's despair. For when they reach the scene of crime, Macavity's not there. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity. He's broken every human law. He breaks the law of gravity. His powers of levitation would make a faker stare. And when you reach the scene of crime, Macavity's not there. You may seek him in the basement. You may look up in the air. But I'll tell you once and once again, Macavity's not there. Macavity's a ginger cat. He's very tall and thin. You would know him if you saw him, for his eyes are sunken in. His brow is deeply lined in thought. His head is highly domed. His coat is dusty from neglect. His whiskers are uncombed. He sways his head from side to side with movements like a snake. And when you think he's half asleep, he's always wide awake. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity, for he's a fiend in feline shape, a monster of depravity. You may meet him in a by-street, you may see him in the square, but when a crime's discovered then, Macavity's not there. He's outwardly respectable. They say he cheats at cards. And his footprints are not found in any file of Scotland Yard's. And when the larder's looted, or the jewel case is rifled, or when the milk is missing, or another peak's been stifled, or the greenhouse glass is broken, and the trellis past repair, hey, there's the wonder of the thing. Macavity's not there. And when the Foreign Office find a treaty's gone astray, or the Admiralty lose some plans and drawings, by the way, there may be a scrap of paper in the hall or on the stair, but it's useless to investigate. Macavity's not there. And when the loss has been disclosed, the Secret Service say, it must have been Macavity, but he's a mile away. You'll be sure to find him resting, or a licking of his thumbs, or engaged in doing complicated long division sums. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity. There never was a cat of such deceitfulness and suavity. He always has an alibi, and one or two to spare. At whatever time the deed took place, Macavity was not there. And they say that all the cats whose wicked deeds are widely known I might mention Mungo Jerry, I might mention Griddlebone, are nothing more than agents for the cat who all the time just controls their operations, the Napoleon of crime. Finally, this little poem I used to always do, or recite, shall I say, at family gatherings, whether it was required or not. If No One Ever Marries Me by Lawrence Alma Tadema. If no one ever marries me, and I don't see why they should, for nurses I'm not pretty and I'm seldom very good. If no one ever marries me, I shan't mind very much. I shall buy a squirrel in a cage and a little rabbit hutch. I shall have a cottage near a wood and a pony all my own and a little lamb quite clean and tame that I can take to town. And when I'm getting really old, at 28 or 9, I shall buy a little orphan girl and bring her up as mine. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce on stage now the most gorgeous man in the world, Simon Pegg.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I like her. She's nice. That's my daughter laughing at me. Hi, Tilly. I've never written a children's book. I once wrote in a children's book and was severely reprimanded by my teacher. My argument was that it was on topic, it was about the book, but he said it wasn't about human reproduction, it was about frogs. But I have read a lot of children's literature, and the book I wanted to read a little bit of today is Danny, the Champion of the World. Now, we've already had a Roald Dahl tonight, but I think Roald Dahl is such an important author when it comes to kids. Arguably, the most important author, children's author of the modern age, I think. You know, I'm sure there's not an author here who wouldn't say they hadn't been influenced by him, or at least inspired by him. And this book I loved when I was a kid, because it's all about daddies and sons. And like a lot of children, unfortunately, when I was a kid, about 7 years old, my dad stopped being around when I was young. I used to see him every sort of 2 weeks or so. And in this book, Danny lived with his dad all the time. He saw him every day. They lived together in this little gypsy caravan. Danny's mom died when she was very young. I wasn't fantasizing that my mum had died. I wouldn't do that. She's there. No, she's there. But I just love the idea of Danny and his dad living together in this caravan. They ran a filling station and had a very normal life. And then when Danny's about 9 years old, he discovers that his father is actually a poacher, which is a really cool thing to be. It's like up there with spaceman and assassin and an actor. She still thinks I work for CBeebies. This isn't changing any of that, which is a very cool thing to do. And what the way that Danny's dad would poach was he'd go into Mr. Victor Hazel, who is the baddie in the book. He's like the sort of landowner, tweed-wearing, big, bumptious, horrible man, makes Danny and his dad's life an absolute misery. He'd go into his land and he'd drop raisins everywhere. And then the pheasants on the land would come and they'd take the raisins and then he would catch them under a sticky hat. And he'd also put like a horse hair to make them choke on it a little bit, because you can't shoot. If you're a poacher, don't shoot stuff, because it lets them know where you are, you see. So he would catch them under a hat, and that was how he poached. Now, when Danny found out his dad was a poacher, he was worried about him, and he went out one night to find that his dad had been trapped in a hole and broken his ankle, and Danny brought him back and took him to hospital, and this is all setting up what I'm going to read to you. And Danny's dad's ankle got mended, and he came back, and their life carried on, and Mr. Victor Hazel kept making their life a misery, and they decided what they wanted to do was get revenge on Mr. Victor Hazel, who is the bad guy I was telling you about. But they were trying to figure out a way to do it. And in this chapter, which is called Sleeping Beauty, Danny he's not that Sleeping Beauty, babe. It's a different Sleeping Beauty. She's bored. In this chapter, which is called Sleeping Beauty, Danny has a great idea. This is it. I put a pink post-it note in there to tell me where it is. 5 minutes later, I was lying on my bunk in my pajamas. My father came in and lit the oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. It was getting dark earlier now. All right, he said, what sort of story shall we have tonight? Dad, I said, wait a minute. What is it? Can I ask you something? I've just had a bit of an idea. Go on, he said. You know that bottle of sleeping pills Doc Spencer gave you when you came back from the hospital? I never used them, don't like them. Yeah, but is there any reason why those wouldn't work on a pheasant? My father shook his head sadly from side to side. Wait, I said. It's no use, Danny. No pheasant in the world is going to swallow those lousy red capsules. Surely you know that. You're forgetting the raisins, Dad. The raisins? Well, what have they got to do with it? Now listen, I said. Please listen. We take a raisin, we soak it till it swells, then we make a tiny slit in one side of it with a razor blade. Then we hollow it out, then we open it up, and we put your red capsules, we pour the powder into the raisin. Then we get a needle and thread, and we very carefully sew up the slit. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father's mouth slowly beginning to open. Now, I said, we have a nice, clean-looking raisin, chock full of sleeping pill powder that ought to be enough to put any pheasant to sleep. Don't you think so? My father was staring at me with a look of such wonder in his eyes he might have been having a vision. Oh, my darling boy, he said softly. Oh, my sainted aunt, I do believe you've got it. Yes, I do, I do, I do. He was suddenly so choked up with excitement that for a few seconds he couldn't say any more. He came and sat on the edge of my bunk, and there he stayed, nodding his head very slowly up and down. You really think it would work? I asked him. Yes, he said quietly. It'll work all right. With this method, we could prepare 200 raisins, and all we'd have to do is scatter them around the feeding grounds at sunset, and then walk away. Half an hour later, after it was dark and the keepers had all gone home, we could go back into the wood, and the pheasants would be up in the trees by then, roosting, and the pills would be beginning to work, and the pheasants would be starting to feel all sort of groggy, and they'd be wobbling and trying to keep their balance, and soon every pheasant that had eaten one single raisin would topple over unconscious and fall to the ground. Why, they'd be dropping out of the trees like apples, and all we'd have to do is walk around picking them up. Can I do it with you, Dad? And they'd never catch us either, my father said, not hearing me. We'd simply stroll through the woods, dropping a few raisins here and there as we went. Even if they were watching us, they wouldn't notice anything. Dad, I said, raising my voice, you will let me come with you? Danny, my love, he said, laying a hand on my knee and gazing at me with eyes large and bright as 2 stars. If this thing works, it will revolutionize poaching. Yes, 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 Dad. But can I come with you? Come with me, he said, floating out of his dream at last. My dear boy, of course you can come with me. It's your idea. You must be there to see it happening. Now then, he cried, bouncing up off the bed. Where are those pills? The small bottle of red capsules was standing beside the sink. It had been there ever since my father returned from hospital. He fetched it and unscrewed the top and poured the capsules onto my blanket. Let's count them, he said. We counted them together. There were exactly 50. Well, that's not enough, he said. We need 200 at least. Then he cried out, wait! Hold it! There's no problem. He began carefully putting the capsules back into the bottle, and as he did so, he said, all we've got to do, Danny, is divide the powder from 1 capsule among 4 raisins. In other words, quarter the dose. That way, we would have enough to fill 200 raisins. But would a quarter of one of those pills be strong enough to put a pheasant to sleep? I asked. Of course it would, my dear boy. Work it out for yourself. How much smaller is a pheasant than a man? Oh, many, many times smaller. There you are, then. If 1 pill is enough to put a fully grown man to sleep, you only need a tiny bit of that for a pheasant. What we're giving him will knock the old pheasant for a loop. He won't know what's hit him. But, Dad, 200 raisins aren't going to get 200 pheasants. Well, why not? Because the greediest birds are surely going to gobble up about 10 raisins each. Yeah, you've got a point there, my father said. You certainly have. But somehow, I don't think it'll happen that way. Not if I'm very careful and spread them out over a wide area. Don't worry about it, Danny. I'm sure I can work it. And you promise I can come? Absolutely, he said. And we shall call this method the Sleeping Beauty. It will be a landmark in the history of poaching. I sat very still in my bunk, watching my father as he put each capsule back into the bottle. I could hardly believe what was happening, that we were really going to do it, that he and I alone were going to try and swipe practically the entire flock of Mr. Victor Hazel's prize pheasants. Just thinking about it sent little shivers of electricity running all over my skin. Exciting, isn't it? My father said. I don't dare think about it, Dad. It makes me shiver all over. Me too, he said. But we must keep very calm from now on. We must make our plans very, very carefully. Today is Wednesday. The shooting party is next Saturday. Cripes, I said. That's in 3 days' time. When do you and I go up to the wood and do the job? The night before, my father said, on the Friday. In that way, they won't discover all the pheasants have disappeared until it's too late and the party has begun. Friday's the day after tomorrow. My goodness, Dad, we'll have to hurry if we're going to get 200 raisins ready before then. My father, by the way, this is what's happening, is that Mr. Victor Hazel, is having a big party. I should have told you this. He's having a huge shooting party, and they're going to take the pheasants away. That's why they're drugging them. So when the party happens, all the lords and ladies have been invited. He's going to look like such a fool. Anyway. Tomorrow is Thursday. When I walk you to school, I'll go into Cooper's stalls in the village and buy 2 packets of seedless raisins. And in the evening, we'll put the raisins to soak for the night. But that only gives us Friday to get ready 200 raisins, I said. Each one will have to be cut open and filled with powder and sewed up again. And I'll be at school all day. No, you won't, my father said. You will be suffering from a very nasty cold on Friday, and I shall be forced to keep you home from school. Hooray, I said. We will not open the filling station at all on Friday, he went on. Instead, we will shut ourselves in here, prepare the raisins. We'll easily get them done between us in one day. And that evening off, we'll go up to the road by the wood and do the job. Is that all clear? He was like a general announcing a plan of battle to his staff. All clear, I said. And Danny, not a whisper of this to any of your friends at school. Dad, you know I wouldn't. He kissed me goodnight and turned the oil lamp down low. But it was a long time before I went to sleep. And that's Danny, the champion of the world. Now, if you... I was thinking of reading a chapter later in the book because it goes crazy. Things get really mad, but I didn't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it. So if you do fancy reading this book, it is a wonderful, wonderful book, and for boys and for girls, and it has a lovely, warm, fuzzy feeling to it, and I just remember it making me feel so good. And when Freya and Maureen asked me to read at tonight's event, the first book I thought of was this one. It just popped into my head, so I can't recommend it highly enough. Have a great festival. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
That was Mr. Maureen Pegg. And now Holly Smale. Holly has written 3 books out of 6 so far in the Geek Girls series, and she is Britain's best-selling teen fiction writer. Holly Smale.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to do 2 readings because I'm super greedy. So I'm going to do an introduction to my main character, Harriet Manners, with the first section of the first book. And then, because this is a festival about books, I thought I would just do a very quick extract from the 3rd book about literature. So, I'm afraid I'm not a brilliant actress, so you're just going to have to bear with me on this. Geek, noun, informal, chiefly North American. Number 1, an unfashionable or socially inept person. Number 2, an obsessive enthusiast. Number 3, a person who feels the need to look up the word geek in the dictionary. Derivatives, geeky, adjective. Origin from the related English dialect word geck, which means fool. Chapter 1. My name is Harriet Manners, and I am a geek. I know I'm a geek because I've just looked it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. I drew a little tick next to all the symptoms I recognise, and I appear to have them all, which, and I should be perfectly honest here, hasn't come as an enormous surprise. The fact that I have an Oxford English Dictionary on my bedside table anyway should have been one clue. That I keep a Natural History Museum pencil and ruler next to it so that I can neatly underline interesting entries should have been another. Oh, and then there's the word geek, drawn in red marker pen on the outside pocket of my school satchel. That was done yesterday. I didn't do it, obviously. If I did decide to deface my own property, I'd choose a poignant line from a really good book or an interesting fact that not many people know. And I definitely wouldn't do it in red. I'd do it in black or blue or perhaps green. I'm not a big fan of the colour red, even if it is the longest wavelength of light discernible by the human eye. To be absolutely candid with you, I don't actually know who decided to write on my bag, although I have my suspicions. But I can tell you that their writing is almost illegible. They clearly weren't listening during our English lesson last week when we were told that handwriting is a very important expression of the self, which is quite lucky because if I can just find a similar shade of pen, I might be able to slip in the letter R in between G and E. I can pretend that it's a reference to my interest in ancient history and feta cheese. I prefer cheddar, but nobody has to know that. Anyway, the point is, as my satchel, the anonymous vandal, and the Oxford English Dictionary appear to agree with each other, I can only conclude that I am, in fact, a geek. Did you know that in the old days, the word geek was used to describe a carnival performer who bit the head off a live chicken or snake or bat as part of their stage act? Exactly. Only a geek would know a thing like that. I think it's what they call ironic. Chapter 2. Now that you know who I am, you're going to want to know where I am and what I'm doing, right? Character, action, and location. That's what makes a story. I read it in a book called What Makes a Story, written by a man who hasn't got any stories at the moment, but knows exactly how he'll tell them when he eventually does. So, it's currently December. I'm in bed, tucked under about 14 covers, and I'm not doing anything at all apart from getting warmer by the second. In fact, I don't want to alarm you or anything, but I think I might be really sick. My hands are clammy, my stomach's churning, and I'm significantly paler than I was 10 minutes ago. Plus, there's what can only be described as a sort of rash on my face. Little red spots scattered at totally random and not at all symmetrical points on my cheeks and forehead, with a big one on my chin and one next to my left ear. I take another look in the little handheld mirror on my bedside table and then sigh as loudly as I can. There's no doubt about it, I'm clearly very ill. It would be wrong to risk spreading this dangerous infection to other, possibly less hardy immune systems. I shall just have to battle through this illness alone, all day, without going anywhere at all. Sniffling, I shuffle under my duvets a little further and look at my clock on the opposite wall. It's very clever. All the numbers are painted at the bottom as if they've just fallen down, although this does mean that when I'm in a hurry, I sort of have to guess what the time is. Then I close my eyes and mentally count 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, at which point, absolutely on cue, as always, the door opens and the room explodes. Hair and handbag and coat and arms everywhere, like a sort of girl bomb. And there, as if by very punctual magic, is Nat. Nat, for the record, is my best friend, and we are so utterly in tune that it's like we have one brain divided into two pieces at birth, or, more likely, two brains entwined shortly afterwards, although we didn't meet until we were 5 years old, so I'm obviously speaking metaphorically, or we'd both be dead. What I'm trying to say is, we're close, we're harmonized, we're one and the same. We're like a perfect stream of consciousness with never a crossword between us. We work with perfect, unquestioning synergy, like two dolphins that jump at exactly the same time and pass the ball to each other at SeaWorld. Anyway, Nat takes one step into the room, looks at me, and then stops and puts her hands on her hips. Good morning, I croak from under the covers, and then I start coughing violently. Human coughs release air at roughly 60 miles per hour. Without being vain, I'd like to think that mine reaches 65 miles per hour or 70 miles per hour minimum. Don't even think about it, Nat snaps. I stop coughing and look at her with my roundest, most confused eyes. Huh? I say innocently, and then I start coughing again. I mean it, don't even think about thinking about it. I have no idea what she's talking about. The fever must be making my brain swell. Nat, I say feebly, closing my eyes and pressing my hand against my head. I'm a shell of the person I used to be, a husk. I have bad news. I open one eye and take a peek around the room. Nat still has her hands on her hips. Let me guess, she says in a dry voice, you're sick. I give a weak but courageous smile, the sort Jane gives Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice when she's bedridden with a really bad cold but is being very brave about it. You know me so well, I say affectionately. It's like we have one mind, Nat. And you're out of it if you think I'm not about to drag you out of bed by your feet. Nat takes a few steps towards me. Also, I want my lipstick back, she adds. I clear my throat. Lipstick? The one you've dotted all over your face. I open my mouth and then shut it again. It's not lipstick, I say in a small voice. It's a dangerous infection. Then your dangerous infection is glittery, Harriet, and just so happens to match my new shoes perfectly. I shift a little bit further down the bed so that only my eyes are visible. Infections are very advanced these days, I say with as much dignity as I can muster. They are sometimes extremely light reflective, featuring small flecks of gold. I raise my chin defiantly. Sometimes. Nat's nose twitches and she rolls her eyes. Right, and your face is producing white talcum powder, is it? I sniff quickly. Sugar cookies. It's important to keep sick people dry, I say as airily as I can. Dampness can allow bacteria to develop. Nat sighs again. Get out of bed, Harriet. But get out of bed. Out now. I look down at the duvets in a panic. I'm not ready. I'm in my pajamas. I'm going to give it one last desperate shot. Nat, I say, changing tack and using my most serious, profound voice. You don't understand. How will you feel if you're wrong? How will you live with yourself? I might be dying. Actually, you're right, Nat agrees, taking another 2 steps towards me. You are. I'm literally seconds away from killing you, Harriet Manners. And if that happens, I'll live with myself just fine. Now get out of bed, you little faker. And before I can protect myself, Nat lunges suddenly towards me and tugs the covers away. There's a long silence. Oh, Harriet, Nat eventually says in a sad and simultaneously triumphant voice, because I'm lying in bed, fully dressed, with my shoes on, and in one hand is a box of talcum powder, and in the other is a bright red lipstick. So, thanks. Thank you. Right, so now you know who Harriet is. I thought I'd just read this one page, which is from the 3rd book, which is about books. And I'm guessing you guys are here because you love books. I love books. It's always been the thing that's most important to me. So this is from Harriet's perspective. Chapter 28. They say that fiction is the closest we ever get to magic. Forget top hats and rabbits. Open a book, an entire world will pop out. And it doesn't matter whether it's full of dragons, Victorian orphans, or wizards. You are immediately somewhere else and someone else. Transported. It's not like that with textbooks. Open a physics A-level book or a biology syllabus and nothing will really happen. Read the periodic table and you'll stay very much you and very much in the same place. But if stories are like magical top hats, textbooks are the ones that change everything. Because the more you know and the more you learn, the more real life opens up. Trees aren't just trees at green anymore. They're full of cells that contain the pigment chlorophyll that only uses the blue and red wavelengths of light. A strawberry isn't a berry, but bananas and watermelons are. Chalk isn't just chalk. It's trillions of microscopic skeleton fossils of plankton. Fact by fact, step by step, the world unfolds, like one of the little origami flowers Rin used to make me, except the other way round. And you realize everything is magic.
Polly Smale. Okay, next up, we have a multi-award-winning author, hugely celebrated. He's written the Lockwood & Co. series of books, and his Bartimaeus series of books has sold a staggering 6 million copies and has been translated into 36 languages across the globe. Please give a massive welcome to Jonathan Stroud.
Hello there. It's lovely to be here with you in sunny Hertford. What a lot of fantastic stories there are in the world. Stories to read and stories to write. How many of you guys like writing stories, or just like writing full stop? Any hands coming up? There's a few reluctant hands in the shadows there. Well, I think there's probably quite a few out there. Okay, well, when I was much younger than you, I was already writing, and I can prove it because I have here my first book to show you, the first book that I ever made. I thought I would just quickly show you this. I carry it around in this little plastic case because it's so ancient, it's falling apart. I made it, I think, when I was about 8 years old. I can't really remember. I remember doing it, though. I made it on lots of little tiny pieces of lined paper, which I cut out and stuck together with glue. And when I'd finished it, you can see I've got a little green cover that my dad put on it. We got it in a G-clamp, and we stuck it down, and we fixed it to our dining room table and left it there overnight. In the morning, I came down, and I can still remember unscrewing the G-clamp, taking the clamp off, and holding it up, and I can remember that feeling of pride and satisfaction that I had my own book with a real cover. This book, which is falling apart, is called Diamond Theft. It's a detective story, because I was into detective stories at that time. And of course, when you like stories of a certain type, if you've got that itch to write, you end up doing your own version. So this is Diamond Theft. I thought I would read you the first page, so you can see what kind of a writer I was at the age of 8. Okay, here we go. This is Diamond Theft. At 3:30 last night, Lady Moneybag's diamond necklace was stolen by a man named Steve Jones. He was seen in a red Ford registration number DGS603T, which was my parents' number, with the necklace round his head. The inspector told me about it. It's my job to keep track of him and, if possible, capture him and recover the necklace. And you won't be able to see it, but a little picture of the necklace there, and a tiny picture of Steve Jones, and you can tell he's evil because he's got a massive scar down the side of his face. Fantastic. So that was where it all began for me. And as I got older, I carried on responding to the things that I liked. And I won't read this one out, you'll be pleased to know. This one is one I was doing when I was about 12, and I was into fantasy by this point. I liked my Tolkien, and I liked C.S. Lewis, and fighting fantasy books with different choices of routes through. This one is the highly literary Tower of the Undead. There we go. And it's full of monsters and ghosts and demons and things. And it's kind of worrying, actually, for me, given that I'm currently writing a series about ghosts and ghost hunters, to realize that 30-something years ago, I was already doing that kind of stuff. I haven't actually progressed in all that time. Anyway, what I've really come to read to you tonight is the beginning of my Lockwood and Company series, because what I was doing there, I was responding to books I liked. What I still do, I sit there, I think, what kinds of stories do I enjoy? I will try and do my own version. I will try and pass on that chain of story that we're all connected to. And so recently I thought I will try writing a proper series about ghosts. And The Screaming Staircase was the first of this series. I sat down one day. In my head, all I knew was I wanted to have a story about young ghost hunters in modern London, excuse me, in modern London, and I visualized in my head a boy and a girl coming to a house in South London, knocking on the door, and they're coming there to deal with a ghost. I knew nothing more than that, and I began to write. And I'm going to read you the first couple of pages of the first chapter so you can see how it all started. Of the first few hauntings I investigated with Lockwood & Co., I intend to say little, in part to protect the identity of the victims, in part because of the gruesome nature of the incidents, but mainly because, in a variety of ingenious ways, we succeeded in messing them all up. There, I've admitted it. Not a single one of those early cases ended as neatly as we'd have wished. Yes, the Mortlake horror was driven out, but only as far as Richmond Park, where even now it stalks by night amongst the silent trees. Yes, both the grey spectre of Aldgate and the entity known as the Clattering Bones were destroyed, but not before several further, and I now think, unnecessary deaths. And as for the creeping shadow that haunted young Mrs. Andrews to the imperilment of her sanity and her hemline, wherever she may continue to wander in this world, poor thing, there it follows too. So it was not exactly an unblemished record we took with us, Lockwood and I, when we walked up the path to 62 Sheen Road on that misty autumn afternoon and briskly rang the bell. We stood on the doorstep with our backs to the muffled traffic and Lockwood's gloved right hand clasped upon the bell pull. Deep in the house, the echoes faded. I gazed at the door, at the small sun blisters on the varnish and the scuffs on the letterbox, at the 4 diamond panes of frosted glass that showed nothing beyond except for darkness. The porch had a forlorn and unused air, its corners choked with the same sodden beech leaves that littered the path and lawn. Okay, I said, remember our new rules. Don't just blab out anything you see. Don't speculate openly about who killed who, how, or when. And above all, don't impersonate the client. Please, it never goes down well. That's an awful lot of don'ts, Lucy, Lockwood said. Too right it is. You know I've got an excellent ear for accents. I copy people without thinking. Fine. Copy them quietly after the event. Not loudly, not in front of them, and particularly not when they're a 6'6" Irish dock worker with a speech impediment and we're a good half mile from the public road. Yeah, he was really quite nimble for his size, Lockwood said. Still, the chase will have kept us fit. Sense anything? Not yet. I'm hardly likely to out here. You? He let go of the bell pull and made some minor adjustment to the collar of his coat. Oddly enough, I have. There was a death in this garden sometime in the last few hours, under that laurel halfway up the path. I assume you're going to tell me it's only a smallish glow? My head was tilted to one side, my eyes half closed. I was listening to the silence of the house. Yeah, about mouse-sized, Lockwood admitted. Suppose it might have been a vole. I expect a cat got it or something. So possibly not part of our case then, if it was a mouse? Probably not. Beyond the frosted panes, in the interior of the house, I spied a movement, something shifting in the hall's black depths. Okay, here we go, I said. She's coming. Remember what I said. Lockwood bent his knees, picked up the duffel bag beside his feet. We both moved back a little, preparing pleasant, respectful smiles. We waited. Nothing happened. The door stayed shut. There was no one there. But as Lockwood and Lucy discover, when they do end up in the house, there is something there, and it's something that is waiting for them. Okay, thank you all very much. It's been lovely to see you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Yeah, next up, we want to introduce an amazing actress called Lindsay Coulson.
When I was asked to perform something here tonight, or to read something tonight, it was such a joy. And I re-looked at all the books that my mum and dad and that were read to me, and also the books and all the literature that I'd read to my children. And I came across one of my favourites, which was The Velveteen Rabbit. So I'm going to give you a little bit of that. There once was a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white, and he had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of parcels. And in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy. And only being made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite naturally snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. The only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys, and that they would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the skin horse, understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Oh, sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. And that's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints, and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, You can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. I suppose you are real, said the rabbit. And then he wished he'd not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive. But the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real, he said, and that was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. One evening when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for the china dog at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door was open, she made a swoop. Here, she said, take your old bunny, he'll do to sleep with you. And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent, and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and they played games together and cuddled all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him because the boy couldn't sleep without him. You must have your old bunny, she said. Fancy all that fuss for a toy. The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. Give me my bunny, he said. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real. When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that the skin horse had said the truth at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. And that night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes that long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty. So that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, I declare, if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression. Read the rest of the book.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. And the final act tonight is Mr. Paul Harry Allen.
Hello. 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 Thank you. Hello. Yes, I will be reading The Bold Twit Lion by Spike Milligan. And for tonight's performance, the part of the lion will be played by Richard Burton. Couple of fans in. There will also be cameos from Michael Caine, Jack Nicholson, and John Peel. Couple of fans in. Once, twice, and thrice upon a time, there lived a jungle. It started at the bottom and went upwards till it reached the monkeys, who had been waiting for years for the trees to reach them, and as soon as they did, the monkeys invented climbing down. Trees never spoke, so they never said much. Actually, one tree did once say much, but nobody believed him. They never said fish either, not even on Fridays. One day, in the middle of the jungle, near a village called Pongoland, a big lion called Mr. Gronk had a sudden attack of strongness. He was 21 that day and had been given the key to the jungle. So he put on a fierce look and, leaping into the air, gave the biggest, loudest roar in the world. Roar! In fact, he roared so loud that it loosened all the roots of his hair, and tinkle, tinkle, all this lovely mane fell off and landed on the ground. Suddenly, Mr. Gronk spotted himself in the Daily Mirror and saw that he was now bold. A bold lion. I'll be the laughingstock of the hyenas, he said. So he unroared. But his hairs didn't go back in. They just lay there smiling up at him in hairy, that's hair language. Poor Mr. Gronk, he now looked like a bold twit lion. One night, when he was having tea, lions, he said, it's a slow burner, He said, I can't go on being bald. It's a big problem. I must find a solution. He bribed a part-time hairy anteater to sit on his head. It really looked like real hair, but the lion got hiccups, and each time hairy anteater fell off. Lion was heartbroken. Sad growls, he said, and then did what no lion had ever done before. He laid himself down on the world and cried, Boo, hairless who. The animals, having no television, gathered round to look at him and feel sad. By now, Bald Twit Lion had cried so much he ran out of tears and had to drink 2 gallons of water. Then off he went again, a boo-hoo, a boo-hoo. All hope was not lost. A crow landed on Lion's nose. Why don't you get all the other lions? Oh, you've heard the crow before, good. Why don't you get all the other lions to shave their heads bald and then yours wouldn't notice? Now, Bald Twit Lion jumped to his paws. Round the jungle he raced, shouting, shave all your heads or your legs will fall off. Soon, the jungle was alive with the sound of frightened lions shaving their heads. But oh dear, everything and every non-lion animal burst out laughing. Worse still, the lady lions were furious with their silly, bold husbands, so they refused to talk or growl to them. All the bald lions realized they'd been spoofed. But then along came a holy man called Daniel. He took pity on them, so sat down and invented lions' wigs. Daniel then glued them to the lions' heads, all except poor Mr. Gronk. Because he was responsible for all the boldness, he was left out. He became so sad, he cried for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, you can't stop a story and leave Mr. Gronk like that. He was still bold, and it was this that changed his life. One day, a party of tourists surprised Bald Twit. They couldn't believe their eyes. Some couldn't even believe their teeth. A bold lion! This must be the rarest animal in the world. Mr. Gronk's head soon became the most photographed bald head in the world. Some people even took tape recordings of his baldness. It's probably still laughing at the crow. For a time, he was happy. But whereas everyone was mad to see his bald head, no one ever came to see him. But God was watching. He liked lions, so slid down from heaven on a religious giraffe's neck. Who are you? I'm Mr. God. If you don't believe me, ask Giraffe. Lion did, and Giraffe said, oh, yep, he's God, all right. If you still don't believe me, ask me a difficult question. How much is 2 times 2? 4. Oh, you're God, all right. Good. Now close your eyes and say miggle moggle cake. Lion did, and when he opened his eyes, he now had a lovely mane of beautiful black hair. He was so happy, he married a Roman Catholic giraffe. And lived happily ever after until the next day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Harry Allen. And we now are going to invite back to the stage our wonderful cast just to take another bow and a fantastic round of applause from you guys, please.
A huge round of applause for all the representatives of Hertford Children's Book Festival. Look at that! Brilliant. Thank you all so very, very much. What an absolute treat and a joy to see all these incredible figures standing on our stage in Hertford. What a treat.